Its military infrastructure has been degraded. It has lost its supreme leader and dozens of senior commanders. What the survival infrastructure means is that Iran has survived long enough and strong enough to sit at a negotiating table and choose when to make concessions and on what terms. That is the outcome today. Iran chose to open Hormuz. Iran linked it to Lebanon. Iran made it a gesture rather than a surrender. Iran retained the coordinated route. America posted "thank you" in capital letters. That is not what victory from 48 days of bombing looks like. That is what the survival infrastructure produces. Now let me address the question that I think is the most important analytical question coming out of today's events, because it is the question nobody in the mainstream commentary is asking. If China's survival infrastructure is what gave Iran the ability to open Hormuz on its own terms today, what does that mean for every future American attempt to use economic pressure against any country that has a deep relationship with China? I want to be very direct about this. What just happened in the Strait of Hormuz is not just an Iran story. It is a demonstration, live, in real time, watched by every government in the world, that the American sanctions and blockade toolkit has a structural vulnerability. That vulnerability is China. As long as China is willing to be the buyer of last resort for a sanctioned country's exports, as long as China is willing to build parallel payment infrastructure outside the dollar system, as long as China is willing to use its UN Security Council veto to block international authorization of force, and as long as China is willing to sit on 1.2 billion barrels of strategic reserves that absorb the energy shock that American economic warfare is designed to create, the toolkit does not fully work. It creates damage, but it does not create capitulation. North Korea has survived American sanctions for 3 decades. Venezuela has survived American sanctions for years. Russia has absorbed the most comprehensive sanction regime in modern history and is still fighting a major war in Ukraine. Iran has survived 48 days of bombing and a naval blockade and opened the strait on its own terms. The common thread in every case where American economic warfare did not produce the intended result is China. China's economic architecture, its alternative payment systems, its willingness to trade outside the dollar, its strategic reserves, its refusal to join American sanctions, is the structural reason that American maximum pressure produces damage but not decisive outcomes. This is not an accident. This is strategy. China has been building the architecture of American sanction resistance for decades, not as a military confrontation with the United States, but as an economic alternative to the American-dominated global financial system. And today's events in the Strait of Hormuz are the clearest single demonstration in modern history of what that architecture can produce. Let me now tell you what I think happens next, because the Hormuz opening is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new phase.